Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and of course a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Townsend Guard, I'm a law professor, and I just wanna quilt. Today we're talking to Jeanne Hewell-Chambers. She is the creator and the genius behind the 70,273 project, which she will tell us about during this interview. But basically, it's a remembrance project for those that were disabled, that were victims of Nazi Germany. It is a lovely interview, and she is really cool. Let's chat with Jeanne. So during the interview, we reference a number of images and other aspects of Jeanne's life. You can go to her website, which is thebarefoot.heart.com. And barefoot, again, is barefoot.heart.com. It's it's the TheBarefootHeart.com. So if you want to take a look at her website, and we sometimes reference some images on there, you have it. You can also go to our website, and there's a special page for each guest, and that includes the links that I'm talking about here. So can you just say hello?
Okay. Hello.
Hello. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, so we're going to begin with tell me who you are. I know who you are, but tell me who you are and where you are.
I know. I'm Jeanne Hewell-Chambers, and right now I'm sitting in a chair in Fayetteville, Georgia.
Awesome. And we're going to start, and tell us the name of your project.
The project is a 70273 project.
Cool. Well, before we get into that, which is a project super interesting and super cool, I'm going to ask you the question we ask everybody when we begin, which is, what is your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life?
Oh, good question. My first memory would be my great-grandmother, my paternal great-grandmother, making doll clothes. She stitched them all by hand, and she dressed my doll very, very well. I had the best dressed doll in the county.
That's pretty great. My grandmother made doll clothes for me too. They were spectacular. But yours was your great grandmother, so that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, she took in sewing to put food on the table. So out of the scraps, she dressed my dolls.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. And when did you start sewing?
About the time my great grandmother made my doll clothes, I guess, because she put scraps and needle and thread in my hands too, so
that's really great.
Just always sewed.
And then what about quilting?
Quilting took me a little while to get to it. My maternal grandmother made quilts. That was one of the things she was known for. She also baked cakes and won contests with her cakes, but she made all of her children 2 quilts and her grandchildren 1 quilt. And so I always grew up with quilts and sleep best when I'm sleeping under one of her quilts. But I was an adult with children before I came to quilting, tried it myself. I made each of my children a quilt when they graduated from high school, and both of them would definitely win the ugliest quilt contest. But from there, I felt a little bit better.
And so tell me a little bit about, so I saw the project at the Quilt Festival and Quilt Market in Houston this year. But that's for people who don't know what the project is. Let's start from the beginning. Tell us what it is exactly. And there'll be a link to your website on our website so that people can look at it.
So there we were, my daughter and my husband and I, sitting on the sofa watching a World War II documentary, which is what we do when the daughter's around because she loves history. She teaches secondary history, and she also travels around the country impersonating Betty Grable, entertaining World War II veterans, which are in such scarce supply now. She spends a lot of her time educating their families about World War II and that particular era. So she it's pretty cool. So we were watching this World War II documentary, and I sat there stitching the drawings of my Nancy, my 57-year-old mentally disabled sister-in-law. Nancy was, when she was around 3 years old, she was outside playing. Back then, they lived in a place where you could let your 3-year-old play out in the yard without close supervision. And some neighborhood boys were playing cowboys and Indians, and she made her part of their game by hanging her from the swing set with a rope.
Oh my God.
So her brain was permanently altered by the time her mom found her. And so, yeah, she's a treasure, though, Nancy is. And in June of 2012, she started drawing, just out of the blue. She started drawing. And in June of 2012, I started stitching her drawings. So that's mostly what my sewing and quilting is now. I stitch Nancy's drawings and turn them into art, art.
I saw on your website today that you can buy those. Like, they're really cute. That you are collaborating with her and creating little quilts that you can buy online. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. When I stitch, when I pick them up, I call them a set. So every time I visit her, I pick up a set, bring them home, and I stitch every drawing in the set. And that goes into the series called In Our Own Language. But then I pull out particular drawings and make the mini quilt, the smaller, they're not minis, but the small quilts out of those. And I do sell those to raise money for the 70273 project. So yeah,
cool.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, they're really pretty. They're great. And they're black and cream, and they're very. I mean, I imagine that if it can get out there, you'll sell quite a bit of them because they're really cool. They kind of blend traditional and modern and they're just really interesting and very cute, and have the hanger too. How do you make the hanger?
Yeah, it does include the hanger. They're cool. Ready to put a tack in the wall and display them. And thank you again for that. The ones that you saw, most of them, when I do the single ones, I sort of frame them with black and white fabric because she lives in a family of engineers and doctors. So they're sort of black and white people, by the way they think, by nature of their thinking processes. And then we've got Nancy. So it just makes sense to me to frame her drawings in black and white, a grid of black and white. Anyway,
yeah.
So I was.
All right. Sorry, we got
off track. Go way down that rabbit hole,
right.
But
no, it's really cool. I love it. They're really interesting.
Thank you. So I was stitching her the 5th set of, which is in the process of becoming In Our Own Language 4. In Our Own Language 4, and this documentary, when I watch television, my attention drifts in and out of what's on television. And it happened to drift back to what's on television and away from what am I going to do with these drawings this time? How am I going to put them together? Back to the documentary, just about the time they spent maybe 3 sentences on something called Action T4. And at that moment, this big, fat, crazy idea whooshed in, sat on my shoulder, and said, listen carefully, because this is how you're going to spend the next several years of life, all your children's inheritance. You are going to gather 70,270 quilt plots from around the world to commemorate each one of the 70,273 physically and mentally disabled people Nazis murdered under this program called Action T4. And so that's what the project is, and that's how it got started, basically.
That's amazing. And so I don't even know where to begin. So tell us how, so I can see it because I'm on your website, but tell us a little bit more about what the quilt does, like what the blocks are, and why you chose what you did.
Yes, thank you. Sometimes I let my hands, haptic intelligence, create something, and then I go back and figure out what it did. This time the big, fat, crazy idea whooshed in and told me everything I needed to know. Didn't really explain everything, but it showed me that the quilts would be on a white background, pairs of red X's on a white background. I did have to research to figure out what that meant. And the white background represents the medical records. The Action T4 was a physician-run organization. And the physicians created a questionnaire that they mailed out to the families of people with disabilities and local physicians who were required to complete them and send them back. And so the background is white or a slightly off-white to represent the paper of those questionnaires, which is the only information the physicians sought when making their life and death evaluations. They never met the person or the families or the community doctors, only read this paper. And then once 2 of 3 physicians put a red X at the bottom of the medical records, the person's fate was sealed and they were murdered, usually within a day or less. And so that's why the pairs of red X's, each pair of red X's represents one person, commemorates one person.
Amazing. And where were the people, where was this taking place? Was it only in Germany, or how widespread was this project for them?
Well, it was based in Germany, and it took the Action T4 was actually formed in the fall of 1939. That's like in October of 1939. Action T4 was formed. They created the questionnaire. They sent it out, and it had to be returned by January of 1940. They only murdered, as far as my research tells me, they only murdered 1 baby in the fall of 1939. And actually, that murder was what gave Hitler the idea for Action T4. These murders that we commemorate took place between January 1940 and August 1941. They had 6 receiving centers. That I think one was in Austria, and the bulk of them were in Germany. And they called them receiving centers, but they were actually, of course, killing centers, as we now know.
Amazing. Have you been able to? This is, how well known was this before your project began?
Very best I can tell, it was a very top secret organization. Hitler made sure of that because he wanted to protect his people who were part of this. He knew it would be met. It was right at the beginning of the war. He backdated the paperwork forming Action T4, backdated it to the beginning of the war, like October something or the end of September, to make it look like it was a war initiative, if you will, because somehow in his mind that justified it and made it perhaps look more noble or something. And who knows what he was thinking. But he did backdate it for that reason. There's one book dedicated to this that I've been able to find, and several mentions in several other books. So it while it was not as well known as some other atrocities of World War II, it was a little bit known, and there's somebody else writing a book about it now, I understand. So it's getting out there.
Yeah. Have you seen any of the actual records, the medical records with the X's on them?
Yes, I have. I mean, not on the computer screen, not live with my own eyeballs, but yeah, I've seen some of those. And we're going to Germany. We're actually having our first. I'm so excited about this. Our first exhibit in Germany will be on June the 3rd of 2018.
Wow, interesting. That will be interesting, won't it?
Yeah, yeah. They're making lots of quilts.
How do you keep track? Next part of the project. So it's 2 X's. It's on white fabric, each block, and the X's themselves are red. So how many do you think you have so far? And all kinds of people will make this now, right? It's like it's a community. Kind of people volunteer and help and make X's, and they look in every shape. Everything you can imagine has been made out of an X, right? Different mediums of everything. Yes. Yeah, it's incredible. You think 2 red X's, they're all going to look basically the same. But even people who make, I'm sitting in front of a quilt right now that was made by one woman. 121 people are commemorated in this one quilt, and every one of the blocks, the 2 red X's are different, made by the same pair of hands, because that's just the way it goes, isn't it? Yeah. I have red X's that have been crocheted. I have a woman I met in Houston who is needle pointing some red X's. I have cross-stitch red X's. I have red X's that have been glued, that have been drawn. Of course, the stitched. I've got red X's that have been pieced, stenciled. It's just amazing what people come up with.
And there's still 2 red X's on a base of white or slightly off white.
And